Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. So we're looking at a stack of sources today that are, well, they're ancient texts, Isaiah, Psalms, Romans, John, but we are not reading them like a history lesson. We're reading them as a kind of description of a binary universe. The sources we have in front of us, they present this central conflict that is, honestly, it's pretty terrifying. It's this intense analysis of the nature of God versus the state of existence without God. It's not just about, religious comfort. It's about a radical claim that divine love is the fundamental operating system of reality. And it paints this stark, almost violent picture of what happens when you try to run your life on anything else.
It is a jarring contrast. I mean, usually when people pick up these texts, they're looking for a little bit of inspiration, right? Maybe a nice quote. But when you stack them like this, Romans 8 next to Psalm 36, next to John 15, you realize the argument is, well, it's much more rigorous. The text is claiming that humanity is designed to function like a branch on a vine, and that separation isn't freedom, it's a state of withering.
Right. It's not God is nice. It's more like God is the battery and you are the toy.
Yeah.
If the battery comes out, the toy just stops working.
Precisely. The sources aren't there. There's no third option. You're either plugged into this specific frequency of divine love, or you're in what it calls the void. And the description of that void in the text is what we really need to unpack today.
Oh, we are definitely going to get into that,
Right.
Especially the psychological profile of the godless person, which is it's fascinatingly specific. But just before we dive into the mechanics of that, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. It really helps us keep these deep dives coming.
So let's talk about the mission here. We aren't here to preach. We're here to look at the internal logic of the arguments. What is the text actually claiming about the nature of this deity? And on the other side, what is it saying about the human condition when it rejects that?
Let's start with the definition of the deity itself. Theme 1 in our outline, the ontology of love. We got 1 John 4 and 1 Corinthians 13. Now, in culture, we always hear, God loves you. But 1 John 4 doesn't quite say that, does it?
No, and that distinction is crucial for everything that follows. The text says God is love. It's ontological claim. It suggests that love isn't an emotion God feels like he's in a good mood one day. It's that love is the actual substance of his being, the raw material.
So if God is love, then you can't really have love without God. Is that the logical leap it's making?
That is exactly the argument. 1 John 4:8 says, whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love.
Yeah.
It's setting up an equation. And then 1 Corinthians 13 gives us the specs, what that substance looks like. It's patient, it's kind, it keeps no record of wrongs.
That keeps no record of wrongs part is a whole data management issue we will get to later.
Yeah.
But I want to pivot to the other side of this binary. If God is this selfless, patient love, what does the text say happens when you reject that? Because the picture it paints of the atheistic state is pretty grim.
It is, and we have to be careful here to separate modern sociology from what the text is actually claiming. The text, specifically in Psalm 36, it analyzes the person who has rejected the divine. It starts with that famous line, there is no fear of God before their eyes.
Which, to a modern ear, sounds like liberation.
Right.
I don't fear any gods. I'm a free thinker.
Exactly. We see that as intellectual autonomy, but the text frames it as a psychological defect. It argues that this lack of fear or reverence, it creates this massive blind spot. The very next verse says, in their own eyes, they flatter themselves too much to detect or hate their sin.
Flatter themselves. That's so interesting. It's saying that without an external standard, without a God to compare yourself to, you just end up in an echo chamber of your own ego.
That's the diagnosis. The text argues the godless state isn't one of objective truth-seeking. It's a state of self-delusion. Without a true north, the human mind it loses the ability to self-audit. We convince ourselves we're doing just fine.
And it gets darker. It talks about their internal life at night. Even on their beds, they plot evil. It's this picture of a mind that's restless, always scheming, just unable to turn off that calculation engine.
And Zephaniah 3, it backs this up on a bigger scale. It describes a city that obeys no one and accepts no correction. And look at the metaphors for the leaders in that city. They're roaring lions and evening wolves.
So the argument is, you remove the divine, that vertical connection, and the horizontal relationships between people just immediately become predatory.
Yes. The text asserts that without the input of divine love, humans will inevitably consume one another. It implies that love is not a natural human resource. It's an imported one. You stop the import, the supply runs out, and you're left with wolves.
Which brings us right to the mechanism of that import, our second big theme, connection and dependency. And we have to talk about the vine metaphor in John 15.
This is, I mean, it's arguably the core operational model of the New Testament. Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches.
Okay, but hang on. The vine. It sounds poetic, but when you actually read it, it's remarkably restrictive. It's basically saying you have zero autonomy. Isn't that a bit dehumanizing to just be a branch?
That's a valid reaction. It certainly attacks our modern value of independence. But the text argues that this dependency is the only way to access life, a branch that detaches from the vine to be independent. It doesn't become a free tree, it becomes a dead stick.
And there's that line in there that really rubs people the wrong way. Apart from me, you can do nothing.
Nothing. Really. I mean, people who don't believe the stuff build skyscrapers, cure diseases. How can the text say they do nothing?
It really depends on how you define something. In the context of these sources, fruit means things with eternal value, things that align with that divine love operating system. So the text is arguing that you can be busy, you can be successful, sure, but if you aren't connected to the source, you're spiritually inert. You're building sandcastles at low tide. And then there's the pruning. This is the part that always gets me. The text says that even the branches that are working, the ones bearing fruit, the gardener cuts them.
He prunes them so that they may be even more fruitful. This is the central paradox of the believer's experience in these texts. Pain gets recontextualized. In a secular worldview, suffering is usually just random bad luck or a failure. Here, it's described as an intentional surgical intervention by the gardener.
So if you're suffering, the text is saying, congratulations, you're worth the effort of cutting.
In a way, yes, it implies you're alive enough to be improved. The dead branches aren't pruned, they're gathered and burned. Only the living ones feel the knife.
That distinction, pruning versus burning, that's the binary again. You're either being cultivated, which hurts, or you're withering, which ends in the fire.
Correct. The text just refuses to offer a safe middle ground. And this creates a huge problem. If our default human state is this self-flattering, withering condition, then how do you get attached to the vine in the first place? How do you bridge that gap?
Which brings us to the legal heavy lifting. Theme 3, the mechanism of redemption. We're in Romans 5 and Romans 8 here. And honestly, the whole vibe just changes. It goes from gardening metaphors to a courtroom drama.
It really does. Paul, the author of Romans, is building a legal case. He contrasts two figures, Adam and Christ. The argument is that the trespass of Adam introduced a virus, sin, and death into the human system. We inherited a broken connection.
So we're born disconnected. But then comes the fix. And I love this specific phrase in Romans 5. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. It doesn't say, once we cleaned up our act.
Right. That is the unilateral nature of this divine love we defined earlier. It doesn't wait for you to be worthy. It moves first. And this all culminates in Romans 8, which is the climax of this whole stack of sources. The text moves from the legal side to a declaration. Therefore, there is now no condemnation.
No condemnation. That is such a massive claim. And it kicks off this sequence in Romans 8 that theologians call the golden chain.
Yeah.
You've got it listed here, predestined, called, justified, glorified. Can we break those down? Because justified sounds like a lot of legal jargon.
It is legal jargon. Think of a courtroom. To be justified in this text doesn't mean you didn't do the crime. It means the judge has banged the gavel and declared you not guilty. Your record is expunged.
So it's an acquittal.
It's actually more than an acquittal. It's a status change. The judge is treating you as if you had never broken the law in the first place. And the text argues this chain is unbreakable. If you're called, you will be justified, and you will eventually be glorified. It's like stepping onto a conveyor belt. The machine takes over.
And I have to read this list from the end of Romans 8. It asks, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? And then it just lists every nightmare scenario imaginable. Shall trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword.
It's a comprehensive list of human fears.
But he doesn't stop there. He includes angels, demons, the present, the future, height, depth. He's basically scanning the entire universe for anything that could possibly cut this connection, and it comes up empty.
It is the ultimate security guarantee. The text is claiming that nothing in the physical or spiritual universe can sever that bond. And this leads to a very practical question. If you actually believe that, how would you live?
You'd live differently. And that's theme 4, the psychology of safety. If Romans 8 is the legal contract, Psalm 91 is the emotional result. It's what you call the fortress mindset.
Psalm 91 is a fascinating study in psychological security. It uses this imagery of total encapsulation, under his wings, shield and rampart. It's describing a person who walks through the world with a sense of Well, in vulnerability.
But is it just a coping mechanism? I mean, it's nice to say I'm under his wings, but bad things still happen to believers. They still get sick.
That's the tension. But the text just doubles down on the supernatural element. It says, he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. The worldview here is that the believer is surrounded by an invisible secret service.
So even if bad things happen, the terror of it is removed.
Exactly. And connect that back to 1 John 4. Perfect love drives out fear. The logic is rigorous. Fear usually comes from a fear of punishment or destruction. If Romans 8 is true and there is no condemnation, then what is there to be afraid of?
The jailer has lost his keys.
Right. The text argues that the believer should be the most fearless person in the room, not because they're strong, but because they're shattered by the Almighty.
So we've looked at the legal side and the structural side, but if we stop there, this God sounds like a machine, a force. But then you look at a book like Hosea or the Psalms and the whole texture changes. This is our fifth theme, the anthropomorphic God.
Completely. The abstraction just vanishes. Suddenly, the text isn't describing a force, it's describing a parent, a deeply emotional, even conflicted parent.
That passage in Hosea 11 really struck me. It's so domestic. It talks about teaching a toddler to walk.
It does. It describes the deity bending down to feed a child, lifting them to his cheek. It was I who taught Ephraim to walk, taking them by the arms. It's intimate. But the real insight isn't just that God is nice. It's the conflict. The text shows a God who is struggling with his own sense of justice.
Because the kid, Israel, keeps running away.
Yes, and God cries out, "How can I give you up, Ephraim? My heart is changed within me." It depicts a deity who is emotionally vulnerable to his own creation. This is not some distant watchmaker. This is a heartbroken father.
And this leads to what you call the forgetful judge paradox in the notes. We see it in Isaiah 43 and Psalm 103. The idea that God doesn't just forgive, he deletes.
This is such a crucial distinction. In Isaiah 43, God says, "I, even I, am he who blots out your transgressions for my own sake and remembers your sins no more."
For my own sake. That's the key phrase. He's doing it so he doesn't have to look at it.
That seems to be the implication. It's a deliberate choice to wipe the hard drive. And Psalm 103 uses that beautiful spatial language. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us.
I remember someone explaining that to me once. If you go north, you eventually hit the pole and start going south. But if you go east...
You never start going west. You just keep going east.
Yeah.
It's an infinite removal, a geometric proof of total erasure.
That's so different from how we operate. We hold grudges, we keep receipts. I might forgive someone, but I definitely remember what they did.
We do, and the text suggests that's part of our brokenness. This divine love has the capacity to separate the person from their past completely. It connects back to the pruning. He cuts away the dead wood, the sin, the past, so the living branch can thrive. He doesn't store the dead wood in a museum to show you later. He burns it. It's gone.
So let's try to pull all this together. We've got the vine, the courtroom, the fortress, the parent. What is the final synthesis here?
Well, if we zoom out, we are looking at a binary existence. The source material argues that you're either a branch connected to a vine, flowing with a life that isn't your own, protected by a fortress of love, or you're a withering stick, flattering yourself that you're doing fine while you slowly dry out.
It's intense. It is definitely not a message of just be a good person. It's submit to the gardener or perish.
Impartially reflecting on the text, that is the argument. It asserts that human flourishing is logically impossible in isolation. It argues we aren't designed for autonomy, we are designed for dependency, and that the only safe place to be dependent is within this specific divine love.
It really challenges that whole modern idea that freedom equals total independence. The text says freedom is actually found in the right kind of dependence.
Correct. Dependence on a good shepherd, not on one's own limited resources.
You know, there's one final thought that's been sticking with me, connecting Zephaniah and Romans. We see these two sides of God, the consuming fire of judgment and the tender parent teaching a child to walk.
Yes, the classic paradox. How can God be both fire and love?
But looking at this whole stack, is it possible the text implies they aren't two different attributes? Is it possible that the fire is the love? That the fire is just what love feels like when it's purifying something it values? Like the fire burns the dead wood because the gardener loves the vine.
That is a provocative thought. If God is love, then his fire must be an expression of that love. It would suggest that judgment isn't the opposite of love, but the mechanism love uses to protect what it loves from corruption. It recontextualizes the whole idea of judgment.
That certainly gives you something to think about. Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. We've walked through the architecture of divine love, from the legal acquittal to the infinite removal of the East from the West.
It's a system that demands a response, one way or the other. You can't really stay neutral to a claim like that.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. We hope this helps you understand the internal logic of these foundational texts a little better. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.